Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. This lecture is about Amazon's Storage Gateway, and this can be a very popular exam topic, so I want you to pay particular attention to this. Now, we won't have any labs on Storage Gateway. It's important that you understand this just from a theoretical level. So what is it? Well, AWS Storage Gateway is a service that connects an on-premise software appliance with cloud-based storage to provide seamless and secure integration between an organization's on-premise IT environment and AWS's storage infrastructure. The service enables you to securely store data to the AWS cloud for scalable and cost-effective storage. So what does that actually mean? Well, basically, here's your data center. Here is the storage gateway. So it's just a virtual appliance that you install into a hypervisor running in your data center. And then that virtual appliance will then propagate or asynchronously replicate your information up to AWS and in particular to S3, as well as potentially to Glacier, depending on what storage gateway appliance that you're using. Okay, so the Storage Gateway software appliance is available for download as a virtual machine image, and you basically install it on a host in your data center. Now, it's supported by VMware's ESXi or Microsoft's Hyper-V. And then once you've installed the gateway and associated it with your AWS account through the activation process, you can use the AWS Management Console to create the storage gateway option that's right for you. So there's 4 different types of storage gateways, and there used to be 3, and it's still not clear as to whether or not they've updated the exam, and also they've changed the names. So the names are a bit similar, but they're also slightly different. So File Gateway is the brand new one, and this is using NFS, and basically this is where you just store flat files in S3. So it essentially allows you to store things like Word files, PDFs, pictures, videos, etc., and it's stored directly on S3. The next one is Volume Gateways, and this is using iSCSI. So this is using block-based storage. This is using storage that you would run, operating systems on. So it might be a virtual hard disk that you've got a VM running on. It might be a virtual hard disk that you've installed SQL Server or MySQL Server on. So it's not for flat files. Although you can have flat files on them, obviously, you can have PDFs saved to your virtual hard disk, but using block-based storage, essentially this is not going to be stored in S3, and I'll show you a diagram coming on. So volume gateways are broken down into 2 different types. You've got your stored volumes, and this is where you store an entire copy of your data set on site, so on premise, and then you've got your cached volumes, and this is where you're only storing the most recently sort of accessed data on your on-premise, and the rest of the data is backed off into Amazon, and we'll show you a diagram of that coming up in the next couple of slides. And then finally we have Tape Gateway, which uses VTL, and this is basically a backup and archiving solution. It allows you to create virtual tapes and then send them to S3, and then you can use lifecycle policies to send those virtual tapes off to Glacier. Now, the old names for File Gateway is brand new. Volume Gateway is a new sort of heading, and then the old names for these used to be Gateway Stored Volumes, Gateway Cached Volumes, and then Gateway Virtual Tape Library. So if you do see Gateway Stored Volumes or Gateway Cached Volumes or Gateway Virtual Tape Library in your exams, they're really just talking about stored volumes, cached volumes, and tape gateway. So it's not too hard to remember. So let's start with the easiest gateway, which is File Gateway. This is also the newest gateway and is most unlikely to appear in your exam, but if it does come up, let me know. But it's the easiest one to understand. Basically, files are stored in your S3 buckets, and they're accessed through an NFS mount point. Ownership permissions and timestamps are stored in S3, and the user metadata of the objects is associated with the file, so things like the file creation time, etc., the file type. Once objects are transferred to S3, they can be managed as native S3 objects, and you can use bucket policies, so you can do versioning, lifecycle management, cross-region replication, etc. So basically, this is a way of storing your files in S3. In terms of the architecture, this is what it looks like. So you've got your application server. It's going to connect via NFS to your storage gateway. Remember, your storage gateway is basically just a virtual machine that's running on-premise. It's running on your ESX servers or on your Hyper-V servers. And then it's connecting into AWS, and it can connect in most commonly using the internet, but you could also use Direct Connect. For For those that don't remember from the 10,000 foot overview, Direct Connect is basically a dedicated communication line between your data center and to AWS. And then we could also connect in through VPC. And what this diagram with the VPC actually mentions, if you remember, VPC stands for Virtual Private Cloud, and it's just basically a virtual data center. What they're trying to represent there is your application server and storage gateway don't have to necessarily be on-premise. They can actually be, it could be an EC2 instance and a storage gateway sitting inside an Amazon VPC. So you could have this all on, inside AWS, and then your storage gateway is then sending information to S3. But there's other ways to architect that. So really the most common use case for this would be exactly as the diagram shows. You've got your customer premises here, you've got your application server, your storage gateway, and then you're connecting in over the internet to S3, and then you're storing your objects in S3, and your objects are going to be flat files. That's why it's called file gateway. So it's going to be things like Word documents or images or video files, etc. Then you can do lifecycle management policies, so you can send them over to infrequently accessed and then over to Glacier, depending on the number of days that you define in the policy. So moving on to Volume Gateway. So Volume Gateway is an interface that basically presents your applications with disk volumes using iSCSI block protocol. So when you start using iSCSI, it's block-based storage. So this is when you use block-based storage, you can install operating systems on it, you can install applications on it, things like SQL Server, you can run databases from it. So basically think of this as a virtual hard disk. So data written to these virtual hard disks can be asynchronously backed up as point-in-time snapshots of your hard disks, and then stored in the cloud as EBS snapshots. And in case you're wondering what EBS is, it's just Elastic Block Store, and EBS is a virtual hard disk that we're going to attach to our EC2 instances, which are our virtual machines, and we're going to do that in the EC2 section of the course. So effectively what we're saying here is Volume Gateways take virtual hard disks that are on-premise, and we back them up to virtual hard disks that exist within AWS. All snapshots are incremental. So basically only the changes that are made from the last snapshot are backed up, and storage is also compressed to minimize your storage charges. And there's two different types of volume gateways. So again, I just want you to imagine as volume gateways as virtual hard disks that sit there on-prem, and then you back them up to AWS, and there's two different types. So the first one is stored volumes, and this is where you store an entire copy of your data set locally, and then you asynchronously back up that data to AWS. So basically what you do is you're going to create a storage volume. It's going to be a virtual storage volume, and you're going to mount it as an iSCSI device to your on-premise application servers. So this could be your web servers, this could be your database servers, etc. So see that as a virtual hard disk, and then data written to that virtual hard disk is going to be stored on-premise in your own storage hardware. So it's going to be stored on your own physical disks or on your own SAN. And then what Storage Gateway does is it backs this data up to S3 in the form of EBS snapshots. So basically it's taking snapshots of the data and sending this up to S3. And remember, those snapshots are incremental. So essentially the size that you can do for gateway stored volumes is anywhere from 1 gig all the way up to 16 terabytes in size. And if you want to have a diagram as to what it looks like, it's pretty simple. So over here, we've got our users and our clients. They're talking to our application servers, which might be our web servers. And then the web servers have an iSCSI connection, and basically they're seeing these virtual volumes, virtual hard disks. And then these virtual hard disks are provisioned by the storage gateway. We have an upload buffer, and all of these virtual hard disks are stored on your own physical infrastructure. So it's, if it's a virtual hard disk that's, 1 terabyte in size and it's not thinly provisioned, it's going to take up 1 terabyte's worth of space on your storage area network or on your physical devices. And then what Storage Gateway does is it basically takes a snapshot. It's then essentially a flat file, and then it's going to go into an upload buffer, and that's going to do multi-part uploads up into S3, and it's just stored as EBS snapshots up in S3. So the key thing to remember is stored volumes is 100%. It's you keep a complete copy of your data on site. So just think of Volume Gateway stored volumes as a virtual hard disk where you've got a complete copy of it on site, and then that complete copy is backed up incrementally to S3. Moving on to cached volumes. So cached volumes let you use S3 as your primary data storage while frequently retaining access data locally in your storage gateway. It starts to get a little bit complicated here, but basically you're not keeping a complete copy of your data on-prem. You're basically only keeping the most recently read data on-prem. All the rest of your data is being stored up in S3. Now, because of the way this is designed, you can store volumes of up to 32 terabytes in size, so twice the size as stored volumes, and your gateway stores data that you write to these volumes in S3 and retains recently read data on-prem. So again, cache volumes, just think of it as all the data that's written goes up to S3. The most recently read data stays on on-premise, and then it also means that you don't have to store, you don't have to rely on having very large storage arrays because most of your data is being stored in AWS. You're only keeping the recently read data on site. So here's a diagram of how it works. So here's our users with our clients. They're connecting into an application server. It has an iSCSI connection, and basically here is our cache storage. We have an upload buffer, so when our users are writing data, it's going to go to our cache storage. It's then going to be uploaded. It's then going to go as virtual disks which sit inside S3. Now, I suspect these are EBS volumes because you can't obviously have block-based storage on S3. What happens is they take snapshots of these disks and then those snapshots are flat files which are stored on S3. So I suspect here it's some kind of EBS storage, but they're not calling it EBS in the documentation. And that's it basically. So every time you write data, it's stored up in S3, but every time you read data, the most recently read data that is stored locally in your cache storage or in your cache storage, which is attached to your application server. So it sounds a bit complicated. I know a lot of people might be freaking out at this stage. Don't worry, hang in there till the end. We'll make it really, really simple for you. And finally, we just have the volume gateway, tape gateway. This is basically just used for backups, so it's using a virtual tape library interface, and it lets you use your existing tape-based backup application infrastructure to store data on virtual tape cartridges that you create on your tape gateway. And so this actually is supported by NetBackup, it's supported by Backup Exec, it's supported by Veeam, etc. And essentially you're just, instead of having physical tapes, you're now using virtual tapes, and these virtual tapes are then being sent to S3. So here's a good little diagram of what it would look like. So you've got your servers, you've got your backup application servers. So this could be NetBackup, this could So here's a good little diagram of what it looks like. You've got all your servers, they're connecting into your backup servers. So this could be NetBackup, this could be Backup Exec, it could be Veeam, whatever it is you use to do your backups. They then basically connect into the storage gateway. It's presented as a virtual appliance. It's connecting in over iSCSI. And then you've got your virtual tapes. These virtual tapes are then uploaded to S3, and then of course you'll have life cycle management policies where you can archive these off to a virtual tape shelf in Glacier. So I know exactly what you're thinking. All this sounds really, really complicated, especially if you don't come from a storage background or a backup background, and especially if you haven't done the EC2 section of the course and you're still trying to figure out what an EBS volume is. Well, don't let it stress you out. We've got the EC2 section of the course coming up, and you can always come back and watch this lecture after doing that. We do this lecture in S3 because this is an S3 product. And the other thing is going into the exam, you only really need to know what each gateway is at a high level and what gateway to use in each scenario. So let's do a quick little recap. We've got a file gateway. This is for flat files only. You're not storing any files on premise, you're storing them all on S3. By flat files, we just mean Word documents, PDF documents. We're talking about image files, video files, etc. What we're not talking about is operating systems and databases. For those, we need block-based storage. And so block-based storage is using a volume gateway, so it's using the iSCSI protocol. And volume gateways consist of two different volumes. So we've got our stored volumes, and that's the entire data set is stored on site and then is backed up to the cloud. And then we have cached volumes, and this is where the entire data set is actually stored in the cloud, and only the most frequently accessed data is kept on site. Okay, really, really simple. And then finally, we have our gateway virtual tape library, and this is used for backup and it's for popular backup appliances like NetBackup, Backup Exec, Veeam, etc. So in the exam, you're going to get a whole bunch of different scenario questions, and you're going to be asked to choose between 4 different gateways. So you might get a scenario which is asking you to store a whole bunch of flat files. You want to keep the storage cost to a minimum. Obviously, you're going to use File Gateway for that. You might have your own data center, and you're doing backups of all your servers, and you're using NetBackup, or you're using some kind of backup server, and you've got a physical tape library, and the tapes are being stored in Iron Mountain, but you want to go save some money. So how can you virtualize this? Well, then you'd use Gateway Virtual Tape Library, and then coming down to or going up to volume gateways. So a couple of different scenarios. Maybe you're a busy media company, and you've got huge amounts of storage, but you don't want to keep it on site all the time. For that, you might use cached volumes to back up your data set, or you might be a financial analytics company, and basically you've got to keep latency down to a minimum, because you've got to be analyzing your data very, very quickly. You can't wait for your data to arrive to your servers, so you must keep your entire data set on site, but at the same time you want to back that data set up to cloud. What would you use? Well, in that case, you'd use stored volumes. So those are the types of scenario questions you're going to get going into the exam. Just remember the 4 different gateways and the different use cases for them. So that's it from me, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.